Okay, so what he's doing here is putting some more dilute on either side of the contact points, because when we're working with wax and wax goes on to a dry plaster or dry stone, it sticks to it. So when he's putting these models together, this is the opposing model, he's going to put some dye lubricant on it as well. So whatever he's putting on and the wax, and he's going to put the models together, it's not going to stick to that lower model either. So he's putting back the dye now onto the what we call the working model, the model that has been sectioned up, and he's looking to see now in terms of the height, how he's going to add his height on and the position of his cusp cones. Right, so again, you need to eyeball it from the occlusal surface and maybe use a pencil first and put some spots down to determine where you're going to put it. He's quite experienced. He's just going to look at it and start to build up in his green wax now. So he's heating this PKT instrument, right? So there are very few instruments in dentistry that you're supposed to heat. The PKT instruments, or one of them, your waxing instruments. Your endodontic plugger end you're allowed to heat, but nothing else should you be heating, because it destroys the actual integrity of the instrument, and then it could fracture off in the patient's mouth. So never be heating stuff clinically that you're going to have to use. So how is he doing that? He's added it on, he's put the model, looked down a long way just now. He was looking from the mesial aspect to see if he's lined it up. Now he's doing the distal buccal cusp, and he's looking at the cuspal height of the teeth next door. And then he'll also look down the buccal corridor to see if he's getting the extent of that buccal cusp correct, if it's in the correct position or not. And again, he's adding it on and building up a cusp cone quite easily. Sorry, that froze there for a bit. And this is very difficult to do, because you're adding on wax and you're blowing on it, you're cooling it, and you want it to actually not slump and run everywhere. Right, so he's looking down on it, and you can see how he's got the cusp cones lined up already on the buccal pretty correctly, and he's going to now work on the palatal. Right, so he's trying to build up now a distal palatal. We know the mesial palatal is your biggest cusp, it's quite prominent. The distal palatal gets smaller, and in the first molar, as you go back to the second molar, it gets even smaller, and the third molar, of course, it's almost fused up. So he's trying to now add on what we call the axial contour, the buccal contour. So he's taken green wax and he's bringing it all the way down now close to the gingival margin. So looking down on the external contour of the tooth to see how far out that would run, and we'd need to fill in. And now he's come to the palatal. He's putting another contour line to sort of determine the height of contour on the palatal surface. Right, and again he's doing it on the distal palatal area now. So hence the importance of the dilute in those areas. So if anything sort of rolls over, flows over, it won't stick and make a mess. It should just be able to slide off easily from the other teeth. Right, and you want to look down again, and look from the occlusal looking down, and then you want to look from the buccal looking down to see if you have the external contours right, and then you also want to look from the palatal looking down. And I think now you might be starting to build the marginal ridges in, right? So you know from your class 2 restorations, you need to build back your marginal ridges, your contact. So this is actually building out now, contacting the distal of the premolar, if you see it. And he has a dye lube all there, so if we do lift that dye off, the wax should separate off without breaking it off or flaking it off, right? So that's the marginal ridge going in there on the mesial marginal ridge. And this determines the shape of your tooth and the anatomy. So if you don't do it properly, you may end up with a very narrow occlusal contour. The tooth is going to look smaller than it ought to be. If you do it too wide, the tooth is going to look wider, right? So it has to be in the contact points now, because we want to get a tight contact point built up with your crown. And he's adding in the marginal ridges of the tooth. right? And going carefully around. And again, always looking at it from the buckle or the palatal to check your height, to make sure that you haven't overbuilt it. So same way if you were doing a class 2 restoration and you made your marginal ridge high, and then you told the patient close down a crunch on it, suddenly you have a fracture of either your amalgam or your composite and it's high, right? And if you've cured it, you now need to go get a boo to grind it down. So he's looking at it and trying to keep the height correct without having to carve away much. So already you can see the shape of the 1/6 taking place, yeah? And he's working, this is a real-time video, so it takes us a lot longer if we are not making, wax-ups all day long. Any one of us having to do it, the skill and the time is very, very difficult. So you have to appreciate what they do quite quickly and they make it look easy. Right, and so that's the marginal ridge basically on, and some external contour bars on as well to give us a guide for the shape. So what he's going to be doing now, you notice he switched his instrument. He was doing the fine tip instrument before, now he's going to a fatter tip instrument because he's going to add on now a lot more wax quickly. He wants to fill in now. He thinks he has the guidelines on the contours. Those contour bars are just his guide as to how much he needs to add on. Now he can fill in quite quickly. And you want the heating of the wax to flow and join the coping wax that we had underneath. We actually want it to fuse in properly with the wax underneath. We don't want it to separate off at any time. Right? And these are critical areas he's building up because he's basically building up the interproximal areas, what would be the contact points for our crowns. And if these areas are not built up properly, we don't have tight contact built back where the patient is able to flush through the contact point of the crown. If you have an open contact, then you get food impaction, plaque trapping. And essentially if a crown, when you're fitting it on, has an open contact, we have to reject the crown. We have to send it back to the lab. So you find technicians will spend time at this point building up the contact point and making sure the contact points are thick or overbuilt. And we will have to, as the dentist, adjust that contact point and make it lighter, chair side, if we need to, right? So then he's filling in. He can't get all the way into the interproximal. So he's filling in all he can with the dye sitting in the model. And at some point during this video, the rest of the videos, you'll see him take the dye off and actually look, there you go, he's taking it off and you're seeing the space he's missing now where the contact point should be. And this is now what he's going to fill in. So he's got to average, fill it in, and then put the dye back on, push it into place while the wax is still fairly soft to give it that shape and the exact contact points. What you want is smooth wax, and you don't want wax that's scratchy or not fused up properly. So the instrument always has to run through the wax. Right, and there he is putting it back down again, pushing it down, taking it out, getting the impression of where that contact is. And now he can work around that because that's the critical contact point area that we want to have when it's cast in gold. Right, and it's so critical that that area is not lost when we come to do what we call the polishing of the crown, that you don't polish it away. It's very easy to do that. So he's got a nice mesial contact there. Let's put it back on, and yes, now work on completing the rest of the external contour and completing the rest of the distal contact point as well. So he's doing a lot more filling in. He's filling in on the external contour now again, more towards the distal buccal side. So the technician has actually worked on the more critical areas first. He's paid attention to those. The areas that are in the middle that are easily accessible, he can do that quite quickly at the end. But he's filling in the areas that he knows are more critical to have a good fit with the crown margins and the marginal ridge areas and the contact points. And now, on to the palatal side. And he's going to do more the distal contact. And he's taking off the dye again. And he's going to now fill in that distal contact area, proximal contact area. Right? So you can see he'll add the heated wax. And before it's set, he'll put the dye back in and squish it on and get that impression there of the contact point. And he'll be blowing on that and waiting for it to cool so it's actually set up a little harder before he moves it off. Right, while that's setting, you can now get to the completion of the palatal external contours. Right, it's just reheating the wax sometimes so that you can run it through, fluid through, and get all your sort of joins, make it disappear in the wax. Make sure it all cools, and you want wax to cool to form a convex surface. Convex surfaces are easy to polish